much for having me, and Anne for inviting me and for assisting me with the test run the other evening. It's a real honor to get to be here with you today. Very fortunate to get to work with some wonderful people and to work with these beautiful animals. I'm very excited to share with you some of our more recent findings. My dog Duke is here. You may hear him whine from time to time, but he's either he's right beside me and unhappy because I'm on Zoom, or he's unhappy because I'm not with him on Zoom. So he's right here. So if you hear anything, it's just Duke, and he is okay. So it has been a couple of years. So we're actually in the middle of our third survey season right now for fall. And so, yeah, I'm just really looking forward to sharing with you. So what we're just going to go over on this presentation this evening, hopefully I don't go too long for you, so to have lots of time for questions for each of you. One of the foundations of our organization is reconciliation, and so I'm just going to spend a little bit of time, especially in light of everything that's been happening recently, for land acknowledgement and a bit of acknowledgement of everything that's been affecting Indigenous peoples recently. I'll give just a quick introduction of myself and the organization. Go into the rescue and the research and how we can help, and the call to action are pretty much the same. We're going to go over that, and I'm going to just reach out to each of you and hopefully inspire everyone to take a few steps at home that will really make a difference. And then I love questions and love conversations. So hopefully at the end, we'll have lots of time for some Q&A. Let's see. So I was just mentioning right from the beginning, we were really clear on our values as an organization at Calgary Migratory Species Response Team, that would be a fully inclusive organization and be very mindful of the work that we're doing here on the lands that we're fortunate to find ourselves on. We were really lucky to work with Michelle Scott at St. Mary's University, and just to ask her, we're mindful of the fact that the animals that we're working with have been affected by urban risks, and that some or all of these animals may in fact be sacred, or at least very important to Indigenous peoples. So right from the beginning, we've been trying to learn more and more about the animals that we work with, and to be respectful, such as occasionally laying tobacco, which is something that would be done to give thanks to, thank you for giving these birds to us for study and for learning and such. So I'm just going to spend an extra minute, if that's all right, to talk about a few things that are, of course, important to us here in Canada. And just thought I'd look into the different residential schools that are actually in Alberta. In Southern Alberta, there are 8 of them. And I've just listed them here. It's quite interesting to see that the most recent one actually closed in 1975. So I was 4 years old when that one closed. It just kind of is very sobering to imagine that it really, we do know a lot of people today who are directly affected by the residential schools. So in the spirit of reconciliation, I just really pleased to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, and the Eyaksi Nakota nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Perfect. Well, thank you for the nice introduction, Anne. So I don't really, won't spend any time on myself other than just being really grateful to work with this organization. This is not my day job. I do this outside of work, but absolutely love it. And so, yeah, it was fall of 2019 that we started. And it's entirely volunteer run still. I think that it's probably not too far from now that we'll be able to start to look for grants so that we can have a little bit more life balance of doing this type of work and not exhausting ourselves while doing so. We currently have 38 volunteers on our team. And that includes our street survey team, rescues. We have people that help us with the data collection, social media, education, like Anne Berner, and just such a fantastic help with the education with Wildlife Wednesdays. Hopefully you've been able to join us for some of those, and there's more coming up. We have a new feather ID team, folks who help us with bird ID, coordination, safety checks on one another. Bird Friendly Calgary, you're familiar with that team now. And we also do some community outreach and education as well. And we also explore for new ideas in terms of where we can assist with research with our findings. So the rescue and the research. So we were inspired by Fatal Light Awareness program in Toronto, FLAP, as well as Safe Wings Ottawa. So in case you're not familiar with us, because I don't want to take for granted that you do know who we are, just very briefly, our core work is going out downtown on standard shifts during the migration periods. And you can see in the photos here are a few of our volunteers taking down data, and they have made some findings there. So we have standard data sheets, collecting data and research on what we find. We hope to find live birds and bats. We work with bats as well. And if we can find those, we hope to rescue them and have them rehabilitated. If we can't, then what we do is collect the feathers, the parts of the birds or the whole birds or bats. All of this is done under wildlife permits, always doing everything according to the law and by policy. So yeah, so we find a lot of information out of everything we find. So we collect pretty much everything, actually. So the method in terms of our surveys, we've tried to standardize as much as possible. This is a community here, citizen science, but not everybody are citizens in Canada. Everybody's welcome on our team. So community science project where the volunteers that are here are, everybody's here on their own time and doing their best to assist with this program. But we're very mindful of the information that we're collecting is going to be used for some very, pretty serious topics. For example, when we approach a building at the end of the year and say, we found 5 birds at your building. Well, what's the context of that? How many times were you at the building? Where does that stand in terms of other buildings who are visited that much? Where does that stand for last year? So we're still in the beginning period of, formulating how we're going to be formalizing those sorts of reports back out to our stakeholders, but we're always in contact with buildings and security, cleaning staff, and any management who will, speak with us about what's happening at their buildings. But we want to be fair. And we want to be transparent. And we also are hoping to be able to, feed in some data into any number of different methods of or areas of research to have integrity for the data that we're collecting. So we have set shift times. And so there's a pre-dawn, which is everybody's favorite. You get to be downtown by 5 a.m. Or you can go on the dawn, which is 7 a.m. and it just keeps going through the day at different times. We have standard data checkpoint buildings. We used to call them mandatory buildings, but really, even though those buildings were selected for various reasons, we really want everyone to be searching the whole of downtown when they're downtown. So because our primary focus is to find birds and bats and to rescue them. So we want to have eyes out everywhere, but in order to have an efficient shift, but also to have standard data, we have standard checkpoint buildings. So there's about 6 buildings right now, and it changes from time to time, depending upon what our findings are, what our needs are, but all the time really trying to keep them the same where we can. That way we do have that year after year comparison. And we have multiple standard data points. So when we're downtown, all of our volunteers will register what time did you start, what time did you end. When you get to a building, you have a start time and an end time. So if you walk up to the Bow building, which is beautiful, what time did you start? And then when you're done searching it, what time did you end? And it's quite common, especially in non-COVID, a lot of us are working kind of on our own or with families right now, but when we're not in COVID, one of the most common things I know we used to say to each other was like, oh, I forgot my end time in the last building. So what was our end time? So yeah, we're always keeping track of that. We're keeping track of, did you find anything? Was it a significant find? How many things did you pick up? Was it a bird? Was it a bat? So we've got a lot of different data checkpoints. So volunteers will actively search, collect the data, rescue live animals, and collect the deceased ones as well. Those data sheets are completed and the photos are also taken. So as I mentioned before, all this work is conducted under the authority of provincial and federal wildlife permits. We want to just share our gratitude for community partners who have helped us with that, and also the Canadian Wildlife Service and Alberta Environment Protection. The staff there have been absolutely outstanding, really going above and beyond for us as we're switching over to getting our own permits right now. And also they've helped us link up with some really great community members that we'll be hopefully working with soon as well. Yeah, so I was just mentioning with respect to the building, and you might recognize a couple of the folks there is Dr. Scott Lovell and Dan Arndt there. That was actually our very, very first shift downtown. And they found a pigeon right away. Not exotic, but it was still meaningful. So I have the action shot of them completing their very first data sheets downtown Calgary. So every shift, those certain buildings do have to be checked each time. Sometimes we do run out of time, but that's okay because we log when we've missed it. If you go to a building and you have quite a few finds of that building, it's just going to take you longer because you're going to have more to pick up. If it's feathers, it's going to take you forever to fill your bag with the feathers, your data sheets, and then carry on. So sometimes if you've got to get to work or something, you just can't do them all. But yeah, and then we watch the other buildings in between, and often you can have some pretty interesting finds in between. Like Anne Berner, you found a bat, I think, with your daughter in between buildings, as did we the other day. Almost missed it. It was the tiniest little, just a little black image, and it was like this big. And just quickly we're like, whoa, it's one of those things that make you stop, like, what is that? And flashed your light on it, and sure enough, a little bat had found itself grounded, and it had himself kind of huddled up into the corner trying to hide. So we were able to rescue him and take him into Calgary Wildlife. The buildings that we choose as our data checkpoints are based upon data that was collected in 1995 to 1997, thanks to Calgary bird batters, as well as FLAP. So FLAP was involved in the Calgary Bird Batters Society. We're working with the buildings downtown Calgary to who actually voluntarily put forward their numbers of fines, which is quite interesting. And when we look back, if anybody's interested at the end, let us know, because I can find the link for you to see that data, because it's posted publicly. And you can actually see where birds were maybe found up on top of a +15 or up on the roof of a lower part of the building where we can't access that. So it just kind of gives us pause to think, what else are we not seeing? Because really we're just on street level. We don't do any +15 work. We can look up at a +15, and sometimes we'll see strike images on a +15, as I'm sure everybody, if you ever go downtown, has seen the odd pigeon outline on a +15. But pretty much we're just on the street, like what you see Scott and Dan here looking for. But those 1995 to 97 data include birds up on higher areas. So we looked at that as to where the high finds were. That was interesting, because if if you're at least as old as I am, you'll remember there's like the Petrochem building and Cantera Tower and a number of buildings that they just don't exist under this name anymore. So that was one thing that influenced how we collect data. We actually named all of the buildings that we look at with a code. So it's B01, B02, B03, and we've got the addresses registered as well as their commonly known name now. So we, when we get all of the data put into one place together, along with the 1995 to 97 data, then we'll actually be able to take, one of the buildings formerly known as whatever, and then be able to track it across to see. But of course, we've got some gorgeous buildings in Calgary that just didn't exist back then. I had gone out and done some preliminary looks to see if Calgary even had any kind of a problem in spring of 2019. And even going out 5 or 6 times, you start to see pretty quickly where your problem areas might be. And I know Bob is there right now. And I think Bob was one of the very first people on Twitter who identified a bird for me. He and Chris Fisher were my Twitter bird ID people, because I am not a birder. And so the ID of most of these birds I've learned through these surveys. Sadly, is often when they're deceased, which is the case in the spring of 2019, when we found it was 2 chipping sparrows and 1 orange-crowned warbler. And all of you fantastic identifiers of birds, don't laugh at me, but I had not heard of them before those days. But for me, the motivation was to know that if there were birds that were injured and laying underneath the building, that if we didn't have a program in Calgary to go look for them, what would happen to those birds? Like who can see them to help them? And then the side benefit has been this just incredible experience of actually holding these birds in our hands. And I do have some here. So if there's time at the end, I brought them up. I have some frozen food sitting with them, not people food, don't worry, to keep them cold. But we do have some of the birds that we found downtown. And if we have time and if you're interested, I'll pull them out of the bags and share them with you tonight. Just a little bit of an example of our shift sheet. So we've got our start time and our end time. And these change from time to time. You see this one's 2019. And it's like anything, once you start filling it out and then you start pulling the data out of it, it's like, oh, I wish we had, a note about the weather at the front. And now I'm wishing I had things like, when's your first magpie that you spotted? When's the first bird you heard on your shift? Because when you're downtown at 5 a.m., it's actually quite interesting when you're down there. And I know some of our volunteers are on here today. You can probably relate to this, where it's just like so silent and quiet for so long. And when you hear a crow or you hear, I think just so many different birds that suddenly start to call. And it actually really stands out sometimes that, oh, that's the first time I heard a bird today. And I think that might be interesting and relevant in terms of when you have scavengers, particularly like a magpie. I'll talk a little bit more about this with the feather piles, which you can explain in a moment. Oftentimes, like a question that we often get is, why don't I ever see birds downtown? I never see birds outside my own window. So obviously I don't get strikes. I don't see them downtown. And the fact of the matter is that after a bird strikes the window, oftentimes they're deceased. So a large majority of the birds that we do find are deceased already. Very, very few are alive, which is very sad, but we're hoping that the ones that are deceased are actually going to help in the long run to help more stay alive by avoiding these windows with darkened lights, not as bright through the night, and marked windows. But when you're, I think there's just so much to it when you're down there and you're looking. I totally just lost a train of thought. It's the story that I was going to tell you about there. But it will come back to me. It will come back to me. In any event, so we've got our shift sheet here. We go around, oh, the scavengers, that's what I was going to tell you. So with the feather piles, the reason you don't see a lot of birds is that when they strike the glass and they fall to the ground after, then scavengers they're just doing their job. And we talk a lot about this, is that these buildings have been here a very long time. So the generations of scavengers that live downtown, the magpies mostly, there's some crows as well. This is probably like totally normal for them. Like, hey, it's fall. Hey, we get some sky candy for a few weeks. And it's probably just a totally normal part of the diet to wait for these birds to fall. So we don't blame the scavengers at all. It's just a really interesting part of this whole process and all of this learning. And so with respect to data sheets, there's so many different things that come to mind as whether it might be relevant data that we should start to collect. Like, should we start marking, like, did we see some scavengers first thing in the morning? What time are they active? Because if we can get downtown before they're actually active, that's really when we're going to find the birds that have struck overnight versus if you come down an hour after. So things like that. So on the survey, so there's a few examples of birds in one bat here that have been found recently. So I'll just, hopefully this works. I've got a couple of little videos here. So when we walk up to a building at about 5 a.m., this is probably what you'll see. And so this is not at all intended to shame buildings at all, but just to give you an idea of the kind of glass that may, where you may find a bird. There are no birds in this first video, but you walk up, you kind of glance around, you take a look on the open area, you look under the trees and such to see if you can spot anything. I didn't have my flashlight on right there. But one thing that's kind of notable there is when you see the glass to the left, there's quite a few lights on, but you can see the trees just inside of this glass. And that's where we can find some problems, because if you're a bird outside and something spooks you and you're looking for a cover, you could head to that tree, not realizing that there's glass in the way. There's also something called a fly-through, which isn't as clear here. I think I have another video that shows it a little bit better in a bit, but when you have a corner, and this will happen in your home as well. So we're focused a lot on these downtown buildings because obviously that's what we do, but there are a lot of window strikes that happen at our homes. And so the same problems with the glass that we see downtown is very similar, just on a smaller scale, as to what we might see it in our homes, such as what we call a fly-through is where you can see, for example, from your front lawn, see through your living room to your backyard. And you'll know there's glass there, but a bird that you see how fast they can fly sometimes, like, wow, they are quick. And if they just turn and like, oh, a tree, they're into your window. So the kinds of ways that you can resolve that would be to put up a blind, put up a curtain, marking the glass on the outside, and things like that. So we just start to get to know areas of the downtown where maybe there's some areas that we just want to check to see if there's a bird that needs to be rescued. And this particular building actually had a robin's nest up in one of these lamps, and we let them know about that. And they actually cordoned off this area immediately. The next time we went out, I think I went out the next morning, and they already had cordoned off so that nobody would disturb their robins. So we're definitely not here to, to shame anyone. I think that it's our belief that people do want to do the right thing, and so we just have to give people a chance to know how to do that. There's a problem and what to do. So the video on the right is from this fall, and what experience that we have is you're walking along, and of course we're searching actively. This was during a survey, and you'll see a spot on the sidewalk, and you think, is a Tim Hortons cup. Because Tim Horton lids look a lot like a bird, and Mars bar wrappers look a lot like a bat. And Starbucks wrappers also look quite a lot like a sparrow. So there's things that are always tricking your eyes. So I'm just going to play this here. So we're walking along and you think, well, what is that? And I don't know if anybody can put in the comments if you're able to identify this bird, how fast you can ID it. And sorry about the leg. I needed a hand in order to move it, but so that's the kind of thing that we happen upon out in the on our surveys. Yellow-rumped warbler, 2 of you said it right away, even with your 4-letter coding. That is awesome. Yeah, that's exactly right. And we found quite a few actually. Okay, just another little video here. So this is just sort of a demo again of when you're walking around the corner. This is from, both of these are from actual surveys. Well, 3 of them have been from actual surveys. Just step back again to take the video of what I saw as you're walking up. And this is under another Calgary building. This image, this video, and the last one of the yellow-rumped warbler, both of these are from Calgary just within the last 2 weeks. The darkened one with the buildings, I think, was last fall or spring. Oh. And see if you can identify this one. Oh, I spoiler alert, there might be a bird here. And that's just it. You're looking side to side, you're looking up and down. Oh, and what's that? It is so small that I don't know if you can identify this one. Kind of a trick question. But another yellow-rumped warbler. So this one actually didn't have a head. It's quite possible this one's predated upon and left, or it could have struck and then been scavenged as well. But when we find a bird like this, we look at all of the circumstances of where we found it. We never say that it did hit a window unless we know it did hit the window. There are some we know. This one we don't for sure know, but it probably did. But that's the kind of thing that we write down in our sheets, is all those circumstances, so that we can, have a little bit of context to why that bird was found where it was. This one is one that was rescued. So I'll just show you this. There's actually, you never really know if they're going to get away from you. And I actually missed one at this exact spot about 3 days before. So I didn't think you'd want to watch the entire time of me creeping up on this bird for about 5 minutes, trying not to scare it so I could try to catch it. But it turned out it was so stunned. I don't know if you saw that, but when the net went over it, it was almost embarrassing, because it's like I could have just walked up and picked him up. And in fact, in Toronto, that's often what they do, is they just pick them up with their hands. They'll just pick them up. But I have seen so many times when it's disoriented, and you really do need to get it in the net, otherwise you're going to lose it. And so then just trying to show you here too, so we're, under the building, and I've got him a little bit tangled in the net, but then we have our rescue kit, and we put him in the kit, and then we carry them along with us. So our shifts are about 2 hours long, and oftentimes we're out so early, and even if we're not, really the understanding with the window strike community, with the rehabilitation experts that we were so fortunate to work with, is because what we do is put them securely into that container, put them into their carrying case, and we cover them with a blanket. We keep our voices low, but we continue on to see what else we can find, because we're hoping that we could, also be present to find other birds and help them as well. So we don't just leave immediately upon finding a bird, because if we did that, then we wouldn't get 90% of our surveys done when we do find a live one. If we find something, obviously, if there's a situation where it's urgent, then we call each other in for some help, such as a really cold bat. Then we'll take off right away to get it to some help. But in this case, like you see there, it goes into the container, we have a larger carrying case, and that's where we start putting all the birds into and carry it with us. And then at the end of the shift, we'll take it up to Calgary Wildlife or to one of the partner 24-hour vet clinics, again, all under wildlife permits. Whatever we're told by Calgary Wildlife is appropriate at the time under their permits, that is what we do. Yeah, so if you have any questions about why don't we just let the bird go if it starts waking up, that would be a really good discussion for afterwards. Let's see. So our findings there, I'll start throwing some data at you. If you don't, I know that some people love data and some people do not. So just keep in mind, I do have some birds to show you after. So I don't want to put anybody to sleep, but we'll show you a few things here. So our volunteer effort, first of all, what I want to mention is the data that I've got here is just the fall 2019 and fall 2020, which is going to feel a little bit older. Well, because it is a little bit older, we're in the middle of our fall 2021 surveys right now. The reality of that is, as much as I would like to have all of our data compiled live, it's just not feasible. And so we do our best with that, but to have it ready for right now, just right now, it's not feasible. In the future, we might be able to have it done more live. So, to have that right up to date numbers for you. But one of the ways that we've designed this is to be able to do exactly this, take the whole of fall and the whole of, like, for 2019 compared against 2020, and then in a few years you'll have year over year. So next year, if you can tolerate my terrible PowerPoint presentations, we can put in some more seasons here and see what the trends are doing. So in fall of 2019, our very first formal survey, we actually have a lot more volunteers than who are doing the actual surveys, but in counting the number of volunteers who actually did one or more surveys in 2019, we had 37 people who would go out and do one or more shifts, to be compared with a year later where we had 40, so we had even more. But if there's any statistics people out there, first of all, you should come hang out with us so you can help us out with even more interesting data compilations. But one thing I find really interesting is that our actual hours went down, and yet our finds went up. So when you're looking and just comparing those numbers, we've got our total hours. In that period of time, we try to keep our falls. Ideally, we would start our fall surveys mid-August, but the reality is, like, I work full time. I have family in British Columbia who there is travel required. So we just do the best that we can with having some life balance. So what works out well to have maximum volunteers is to do those first 2 months of right from the end of August, say September 1st, all the way through the end of October. And we're still finding birds at the end of October, and particularly bats, actually. The numbers change for the timing, but we do still find some animals. So basically, from, say, August 29th through to October 31st, fall 2019, we had 64 days where we actually held some shifts. And then we had the following year, only 49 days that had shifts. So, and 198 volunteer spots were covered. So with the volunteer spots, you might have a pre-dawn shift, and you might have 2 two spots there to have pairs for safety and to help each other. But with COVID, that changed a lot of things. So we actually had 198 spots covered. Sometimes there might be a family member with that person. But their fines per day, for all 29, fines per day, 1.61 fines per day and 0.67 fines per shift, compared to 3.76 fines per day, or 2 fines per shift. So part of what's going on there is something that we want to learn more about is, are there actually more birds, or are we becoming more attuned to what we're looking for? So we're just more efficient at finding. One thing we'll talk about some more is with feather piles are quite important to us. So are we just better at finding feathers, or are there actually more birds coming down and colliding? I do think actually there are more birds. There were more birds actually colliding like that. There's just such a much higher number between the two years for it to be just purely out of practice, because we had quite a bit of practice over 64 days in the fall of 2019. Okay, so yeah, just a little bit more about, basically it's the same two charts, and then just showing the difference between, so the reduction of hours between 2019 and 2020. And then looking at the overall volunteer effort in total on the lower right-hand corner there. So on average, we had 38.5 volunteers doing surveys per season, with a total of 1,074 volunteer hours, which is very, very generous of our volunteers. We had 180 days ahead shifts, 522 volunteer spots covered. So the fines, 287 fines. We excluded bats because we're talking about birds today, with an average of 1.59 fines every time you go out. So you could expect on every shift to find something. Not always, but it's an average, right? So the species is always a really interesting topic, of course. I'm not sure if anybody here likes birds, like species, maybe. So we're happy to show you a few things here. And if you have questions, to let us know. If it's something where I don't have it handy, I'm happy to go and look that up for you. So, so do let us know. So with respect to the fall 2019 and fall 2020, we've got species known versus not known. So ideally, we would be out there and you'd be like Dan Arndt and be like, oh, people here. And all of the folks that go out, we're all learning about the species and the ID, and anything that we don't know, where we don't know what it is, we have each other, but we also have people like Dad, Bob, Chris Fisher, if we're really stuck, you know, to help us with that identification of the species. So anywhere we have a whole bird, that it will be identified. And so in those situations, we have their species here. There aren't any birds that we had in hand where we had the whole bird that we don't know the ID. Those are all known. The ones where we don't know, that would be where we walk up and Kathleen misses the rescue and can't describe the bird to somebody because it's in the dark. I could say it's really, really small. I think it might have been, you know, brown creeper, but I'm not sure because it's me, not one of the people who knows all their IDs. But most of the time, it's actually the feather piles. So feather piles, you can see some pretty interesting feathers, but identifying them, that is another whole task, which is very, very interesting. So as of at the end of fall 2020, we had 49 separate species identified. 49 different species of birds identified as likely having suffered impact of glass and or having met their demise due to human-caused urban risk. There are situations where we do become aware of different areas at different buildings where there might be actually a physical trap, and that all the volunteers know now to go and check that spot. And it's thanks to the volunteers' keen eyes that these come to our attention, and then we'll try to let the building know about that as well. Just alphabetical. So we'll just give you a second to take a look at that. I do have them by their top 15 in a moment as well. So I'll just read them out here just in case anybody has any vision issues. There's a, just going alphabetically top to bottom, and this is fall 2019, 2020, brown creeper. Seem to have a lot of brown creepers. Only one black-capped chickadee, American coots, if you can believe it. The first couple in fall 2019, we're pretty sure they were predated, but the fall of 2020, and then there's one that you don't see here yet because that was spring 2021. One of them found by Ann Berner that had hit the glass doors of a store downtown, actually. And then the other one I found on, I was just doing a reconnaissance trip downtown to see what was going on, and found a coot of all things on the train tracks under a +15. So I actually have a coot here for you to see. American crow, pine grosbeak in the finch family, pine siskin, gray-crowned rosy finch, northern flickers, or, not uncommon to find. A belted kingfisher, and this one, the belted kingfisher was actually brought to our attention by a security guard, and it turned out that it actually had a respiratory issue. It's not thought to actually have been a window collision, but we do count it because our team did work with it. And unfortunately, out of all of the live birds that year that were found, that was the only one that did not make it, and it was just due to he's just very sickly when he was found. Golden crown kinglets, ruby crown kinglets, and boy, if you want to see a tiny bird, that's the tiny bird to see. Black-billed magpies, none in fall of 2020, which is interesting, but a couple in fall 2019. Red-breasted nuthatches, look at all of them. If that doesn't break your heart, who doesn't love a red-breasted nuthatch? And the white-breasted nuthatch as well. Rock pigeons account for quite a few strikes. American robins, dark-eyed juncos. That's another species I didn't know about until we were picking them up deceased under buildings downtown. American tree sparrow, chipping sparrows, clay-colored sparrow. And the house sparrow is interesting. We have only ever found one in all of our surveys. They just don't seem to collide. Lincoln sparrow, quite a lot of those. Savannah sparrow, white-crowned sparrow, Townsend solitaire, red-eyed vireo, warbling vireo. And a lot of the ones the fall 2020 were ID'd over Zoom with Dan, which is interesting. I think the warbling vireo, we did that. The American redstart, common yellowthroat. Ovenbirds are ones that I had not heard of before and are very close to my heart. And the Blackburnian warbler, I will never forget. I believe, as I say, I'll never forget. That one was, I think, found in the rain underneath one of the buildings. It was very sad. Blackpoll warbler, magnolia warbler, morning warbler, Nashville warbler, orange-crowned warblers are very often found. A palm warbler, Tennessee warbler, Wilson's, yellow warbler, yellow-rumped warbler, house wren, and winter wren. So for fall of 2019, I think what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to skip down here a little bit. I have the finds here. Oh, no, it didn't work out. Let me go back up. Now, I knew I'd have a slide with an error. Gotta have one. All right, so the top finds for fall of 2019. And you can see here the top were the Lincoln sparrow, white-crowned, and rock pigeon, Wilson's warbler, and brown creeper. And if anybody at the end wants me to go back to these slides, I'm happy to. 2020, we have nuthatch, Lincoln sparrow, and white crowned sparrow. So just going back, Lincoln sparrow was the #1 in fall of 2019. It was #2 the next year, and the red-breasted nuthatch took its spot. So with the total over those years, 23 Lincoln sparrows we have found, 18 white-crowned, 15 red-breasted nuthatches, 11 rock pigeons, 11 yellow-rumped warblers, 8 Wilsons, 7 dark-eyed juncos, and the list goes on. I mentioned the feather project. I think I'm okay for time, but I'm almost done here. With the feather project, we each of the groups that goes out and does this sort of thing, where we go looking for birds that need rescue or to be assisted. We let's see. Yeah, so we just want to go out and to find those birds, hopefully to rescue them. But what we want to do is to compile that data and find out how many strikes are actually happening. So a big part of that is actually with respect to the feathers. So we do collect feathers. I'll show this really quickly here. This is what we happened upon the other day, and took a video, maybe used for training, because as you're walking by, it didn't look like anything. We've got, but it ended up being feathers. It just doesn't look like much. There's leaves, but then when you start to look closer, I found close to what I think probably would have feathered an entire bird throughout the area. And so we've always collected the feathers, but now we're going to be looking at them a little bit more closely in terms of ensuring that they're all identified, because oftentimes we'll find a pile that has, we think, more than one species, and our hypothesis is that it may, by looking at these and really identifying them, that they're really going to increase our data in the terms of the number of birds that are striking downtown. Awesome. So just a couple of other projects that we're involved in and we're looking at, just assisting with some trial studies by third parties where they've needed some specimens in order to help indirectly to help other birds with turbines and things like that. The roaming cat project is underway right now. We have 15 cameras in 15 backyards just to check and see how many cats are actually roaming. That's also in support of Bird Friendly Calgary. Wildlife Wednesdays, their education. And very preliminarily, we have reached out to U of C to check and see if there's any way that these birds may help contribute to the study of human concussions and such. So, and just very quickly, I've got a link here and we'll provide at the end. We want to help you to, it's really sad seeing these birds all the time, and it's so preventable. So we just really want to kind of put a little call to action, everybody, to mark your windows if you can. And I've got a few different ways to do that here. I can show you. But yeah, lots of resources online. And the big thing is, if you can just remember, your ruler is your first thing, because it's the spacing between any markings that you have. I just want to point that out, because if somebody says stick one decal on there, it's not effective, unfortunately. So perfect. So there's a few references, and